Hey folks, I'm Brett Kinsella, and this is GAIN, the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every week. We talk about the top stories in generative AI news. And this week, we have news from ChatGPT. It's got some new features, which are pretty compelling. The White House, Joe Biden's White House, put out some new rules regarding generative AI, and they might have a little bit more impact than you're originally led to believe. We also have a $2 billion check going to Anthropic from Google. We have new data on deepfakes and a whole lot more. I hope you enjoy it. All right, folks, I'm here with my colleague from Voicebot.AI, Eric Schwartz. Hey, Eric, how are you?
Good. Lots to talk about today.
There is a lot to talk about. We also are going to be doing something coming up next week for those of you who have tuned in today. We're going to do a live stream of the OpenAI Developer Conference. That's going to be at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to start a little bit early with a panel discussion about what we expect to see. And then we're going to follow it with a discussion from developers as well. So there'll be more information coming out after this. So if you don't subscribe to the Synthedia newsletter, please do. Or follow us on LinkedIn. I'm Brett Kinsella. We have Eric Hal Schwartz on LinkedIn. Let us know you watch GAIN. You'll be notified of this. And then Synthedia is obviously bit.ly/Synthedia, and maybe Andrew, our producer, can put that in the chat so everybody can see this. Before we get to the deepfakes, because we have some new data on deepfakes, I want to hit that topic really quickly first. If you're out there, just let us know you're there. Drop us a comment, let us know. Also, feel free, make comments, ask questions. Those of you who've been here before know we like to work that in. Okay, so the first story that I want to talk about today, Eric, is around deepfakes and voice clones. We just did a large national consumer survey of over 2,000 U.S. adults. And the intent here, we did this with Pindrop Security. You might know them as that. We want to understand what people actually know about this space. And do they know the terms? Do they understand what the implications are? What's their level of concern? And so a few things that I thought I would just walk through. So first of all, I was surprised by this. Deepfake awareness is much higher than I'd anticipated. In fact, for deepfakes alone, just that term, 54% said they recognized the term. And then we asked them a bunch of subsequent questions about it to verify that, but also to get their perspective. And over 60%, almost 2/3 of the people knew what voice clone was. So I thought that was super fascinating. Next up, we have a concern level. And if you look at this, so we've got the very concerned and extremely concerned, right? So 60%, both are about 60% for voice. But actually, at least some concern is over 90%. So just based on those data points, maybe we'll go through a few more in a moment. What are your thoughts, Eric?
I mean, it makes sense to me on both sides. I think the frenzy or the interest in generative AI has propelled a lot more general consumer awareness of the technology and what it implies in terms of deepfake. Deepfakes have been part of the conversation in terms of fraud and in pop culture for a while now. I mean, it's been a few years since Black Mirror has started, and then that's certainly come up there a couple times. And same with voice clones. I think possibly just because voice clones is a fairly self-explanatory term. Deepfake, you need a little more. And the concern makes sense because part of the reason that people know the terms is because they see stories about those technologies being misused, about fake Tom Hanks, about musicians having their voices used for songs that they didn't actually participate in. There's a new lawsuit out about it. I feel like every other day now. And in fact, a new one dropped yesterday by Scarlett Johansson on exactly that topic. I think the mainstream understanding of technology now encompasses, at least broadly, the ideas behind deepfakes and voice clones. And even if you're not like worried about yourself being having a deepfake made of you, it's still a technology that you might be worried about becoming more commonly used for less than benign purposes.
Yeah, that's actually a good segue too, because I have another chart here. I'll skip ahead to it. Domains where consumers are most concerned about voice clones in particular, but we also have this for deepfakes, but it's banking, politics and government, media disinformation are the top three, followed by healthcare and insurance. And those are the areas that are well ahead of everything else. I mean, you see the other categories, 6.2%, but like home and utility, sports, games, music, those types of things, not as big of a deal for folks. They're worried about the things that touch on personally identifiable information, money, health, and then more societal things around how this might impact government, how this might impact the media and how people consume and what information they believe.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, the instances in which we are most likely to be on the phone is when we're, if we don't want to do something online, it's going to be probably money or health related. So that makes sense. That would be the big concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a question here from Rucha Gokal. Hey, thanks, Rucha. Great to have you here today. Did your research also cover any use cases that users thought were right for using AI clones? And in fact, yes, we actually have a whole section in that document where we highlight some use cases, both good and bad. And what we found, actually, I'll bring up another chart here to illustrate this. I'll give you some examples. The first is that if you look at the sentiment around deepfakes and voice clones, it's actually, essentially an inverted bell curve. We've got it on the side here, but you can sort of it's not a normal distribution where you think everybody sort of converges towards the middle. It's actually they converge towards the poles. People are either extremely positive or extremely negative about it. So there are about a third of the people who have generally positive sentiment, and a little more than that who have generally negative sentiment. This gets skewed significantly when we ask people if they've seen things like America's Got Talent or Star Wars, where they've used some deepfake content, or different types of YouTube videos, or the Andy Warhol documentary. Those people become off the charts positive, like much, much more significantly positive in terms of the technology. And so there are a number of those, and some positive use cases are some of those ones I just mentioned. Think about The Irishman. We talk about that in terms of media. There's a lot of people who've done this from a humor standpoint, like Tom Cruise. And so it is very favorable from that standpoint. Now, that's just sort of broadly deepfake. When we think about voice clones, we didn't go into much detail on this, but another very, I think, popular in terms of sentiment use case is the use of recreating someone's voice as a voice prosthesis. So they've lost their ability to speak. We had an article a couple of years ago, I think, Eric, you wrote it, about Val Kilmer. Sonantic, which subsequently was acquired by Spotify, actually recreated his voice because he'd had actually throat surgery and they had to remove his voice box. And so they recreated his voice so that he, in some circumstances, could actually use that. So there are definitely some people who have favorable sentiment. But there's a lot of people with negative sentiment, and this is driving a lot of the visibility, but also the bifurcation here in the market in terms of the way people think about it.
Yeah, I suspect, like many technologies, above board consensual use of it is going to be seen really positively because it's going to be used for helping people or for entertainment, things like that. And then those who use it for other purposes, the people won't be as fond of that. So it's, like most technology, it's neutral depending on how it's used, but the potential good and bad for it is extremely high, I think.
Yeah, I'll hit on one more point here, because in terms of industries and the way that consumers are looking at this, I think it's pretty interesting here. Now, there's a lot of data in this chart. What you can see is that that purple on the left, banks, insurance, and healthcare, people generally have a slightly higher level of confidence that banks, health insurance, and healthcare companies have done something about this to protect them. But there's a lot of unsure in that place. And there's a bunch of people who just think, of course, they must have done something. I'll tell you right now, almost nobody's done anything. There are some people who are doing it. There are some solutions out there now that are able to detect this, but we're very early on. So there's actually a little bit of a mismatch, I think, between what people think might be done and not. And then you look over to the right there, social media. People that's the one where they have the least amount of confidence that something's been done and the most amount of fear that something hasn't been done. So I think that's really, really interesting. Rocha had another comment here too about any takes on Meta's latest AI-powered assistant experiment. Yeah, we did it. We actually talked about that a lot a couple of weeks ago. I think it was maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago on the podcast. And I think it's really compelling. And I actually believe that probably will increase positive sentiment around deepfakes because these entertainment solutions generally leave people with more positive sentiment. At the same time, it doesn't mean they have, even people with very high positive sentiment actually have very high concerns. In fact, they over index on concerns if they over index on positive sentiment because they're the ones who know the most about it. So they see it's good, but they also have the most concern.
Yeah, and I suspect that part of what will happen with Meta is that it will help normalize it, the technology in good and bad ways, where people may not necessarily enjoy using them, but they'll start to see it as just like, oh, another tech tool, another toy, rather than a threat, potentially.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's move on to the next story. But hey, anybody, if you just joined us, this is GAIN, the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every week, usually at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Eric and I get here together and talk about this. Sometimes we have guests as well, but let us know you're out there. Let us know who you are, what you're doing. Give us a like, please, on LinkedIn and YouTube if you're there, so that people know that there's a lot of cool activity here. And make comments, as Rich has already. That's been already good addition to the conversation. So I wanted to bring up our next story here is a story you wrote about first. And I've actually been doing a lot of research. I have not written about it yet in Synthedia. I have a longer piece coming out. I'm actually probably going to put something in our research note as well around the new AI Act, the executive order coming out of the President Biden's White House. Eric, give us some background on that.
Yeah, so it's been coming. People have been expecting it, but President Biden issued an executive order that covered all kinds of AI topics, including safety, including setting up the process for various departments, government departments, to come up with their own systems for using generative AI, for setting up safeguards against it. It was a very, unsurprisingly, very safety and it was focused on preventing problems more than it was about implementing the technology positively, although there was definitely some of that. But really what it did is sort of help set a foundation level for both companies and governmental departments to work out how they want to use the technology, where they think it'll be useful, where it should be there should be some concern. The National Institute of Standards and Technology is working on a testing system so that as new AI programs are developed, they can actually test those programs for safety concerns the way they would other, especially consumer products. And there's a lot of money going into this. There's several new research hubs that the government is setting up, built around generative AI and its use for the government. And it's going to really, it helps at least set the broad outline of where the U.S. is going in terms of regulating the technology, which is something that Europe and China have already done. And, everyone was waiting to see what the U.S. is going to do. And while this is far from a total, complete package of regulation, it at least sets out some guidelines and some standards of what the Biden White House wants those regulations to look like.
Yeah, while you were talking, I scrolled through the executive order just to give people a sense. I only scrolled through maybe a third of it. It's very long. I recommend people take a look at it. There are things like definitions of generative AI. It means a class of AI models that emulate the structure and characteristics of input data in order to derive synthetic content that include images, videos, audio, text, and others. There's also a definition of something that's called dual use foundation models, which I think is very interesting. It's basically saying a foundation model that might be designed to do one thing, but could be easily repurposed for doing something nefarious. And I think that's also interesting. They talk about this idea of synthetic content. We talk Synthedia, this whole idea of synthetic media, synthetic content is sort of baked into what we do because we think of generative AI in particular as a subset of that. We just talked about deepfakes. Some of that can be generative, but much of it is actually not generative in its format. So originally when this came out, the way it was actually sold or previewed like over the last couple of weeks was that this was going to talk about the federal government's use of AI, of generative AI in general, but generative AI in particular. And this is much broader than that. And I think you alluded to that. It's actually, it could be a regulatory scheme that is actually more strict and more detailed than the EU AI Act, which is going through tripartite negotiations right now. It's not as clear now, and it doesn't look as strict as China, but certainly like far away from the Singapore doctrine that has been around since 2018 or 2019, where it's more like voluntary, and that's what we'd had up to this point, sort of voluntary commitment. This is directing a number of different federal agencies to put rules in place for their own use. Most of those are like 90 to 180 days. And then for the rules associated with outside organizations, like for the Department of Commerce, for companies, somewhere between 180 days and 240 days, which is like 10 months, right? So sometime next year, you might see full force. And this executive order also was issued under the Defense Production Act, which, unlike other executive orders, actually gives it more of a force of law. It can still be challenged in the courts, but it's actually, until Congress overrides it or until a court says it's unconstitutional, this actually could become the law of the land, and it's going to hit the private sector.
Yeah, and I'd say that's part of the point of it was that, especially with a divided Congress, it sends signals to Biden's political allies in Congress and also just in general that of what will be looked on favorably and what might draw some negative attention or even legal action. But there's only so much there's only so much an executive order can do, because of course Congress has to decide how much money to spend on what. But using existing laws to speed things up is certainly a smart move. And I will say, on the positive side, it did feel like people who understand the technology put it together. It didn't feel sometimes, especially when it comes to things like the Supreme Court, it feels like people who don't understand technology are setting up the rules. But this feels like, at the very least, they know what they're talking about, and you can agree or disagree about how they want to regulate it, but at least they're talking about regulating the actual existing technology and not something that they don't understand.
I don't know. I might disagree somewhat. I mean, I think like there's things in there that clearly there is some understanding. There's a term around dual use models around them. It appears to me, and I'll have more analysis on this coming up over the next week or so, that it only applies to models with fewer than 20 billion parameters. The threshold might be higher, but they focus on parameters as opposed to data and some of these other things. And there's another thing. If we get to it later today, there's been this a lot more discussion over the past 2 weeks, and particularly over the past week, about open models and how this might impact open models. The EU AI Act, I think, is actually a bigger threat to open models than this right now. But this idea of control and mandating that someone have control over, for example, the model weights, would mean that basically an open source solution, which you want to actually publish the model weights typically for the open source LLMs, so that people can actually do what they want with it, that would actually render that illegal. Okay, so Dejaro said, anything on accountability at the C-suite level, particularly concerning data privacy, which could easily weaponize the technology? I think the answer actually is no. In terms of, I mean, there are some mentions of data privacy, but I think it's like basically standard of care right now. And Pete Erickson also said everybody needs an AI policy and strategy, and he put out a poll so people can look at that really quickly if you go into the notes or the comments in the LinkedIn stream that's going on right now.
Yeah, I think it's the order is definitely trying to walk a line of not stifling or even seeming to stifle innovation while still ensuring safety. But yeah, it's again, because it lacks the enforcement capacity of a bill passed by Congress. Some of it is built around like, if you're acting in good faith, these are the kinds of things we want you to pursue, rather than telling them specifically, here's the privacy regulations that you should have in place.
All right. Hey, Pete, what do we think? I think, yes, I think every company needs to have a generative AI governance model. In fact, I'm working with a couple companies right now, helping them define what their AI governance and the generative AI governance. I did talk to a number of organizations several months ago who told me, and this is really why I started working with companies on this. They said, I think our data governance policy, our IT governance policy can cover this. And I said, actually, no, these are like, it's a completely, the way these systems operate are very different. And the other thing is, like, when you catalog your solutions, which is one of the recommendations in both the NIST framework and the AIGA framework, which is out of the Nordics, one of the things you have to do is list all the applications you use internally, including third-party applications that use AI that could potentially impact either your employees or your customers, which is all applications. So I think everybody actually needs what I would call a generative AI framework. And then when we talk about strategy, yes, as well, that's a separate type of thing. And then a policy would be, something under the framework.
It's also a fact that the technology has evolved so rapidly. I mean, a couple years ago when GPT-3 came out compared to now, it's a lot more things to consider than if you came up with a policy then. That would be very obsolete by now.
Absolutely. Okay, so let me move some things around here. Hey, this is Gain, the Generative AI News Rundown. We try to do this every Thursday at 11 a.m. Sometimes not. Sometimes it gets moved around. So just follow Eric and I on LinkedIn so that you'll always get notified about this. We try to make sure people know at least the morning of, sometimes the night before if we're really good, about this. All these articles so far that we've talked about have been also published in Voicebot.AI or Synthesia. We've got some today that are not, but that's another place to look. If you want to know more about what we're reading, because we only write about a small subset of what we think are important stories in the space because of capacity. We actually have a pretty popular now LinkedIn newsletter, which is basically just headlines. It comes out twice a week. It's just like, here are all the things we're reading. It's got some stories from us. It's got some stories from third parties, but it's just a very quick way to get that. And then, so it might be something you like to supplement your diet. And today what we're doing is we're going deeper on a few of these topics that we think are particularly important. So before we get to ChatGPT, I want to jump in and talk about our funding fountain, sort of like our second segment that we usually do here today, because, hey, there's a lot of funding stories out there. So in the funding fountain world, it seems like this was 2 weeks ago. It seems like a long time ago, but maybe it's because Anthropic's in the news all the time. Well, you may recall that, maybe I even have a link to it down at the bottom of this, that a couple of weeks ago, Amazon agreed to invest up to $4 billion in Anthropic. And there's a lot of implications from that. I have a very long article. I think it might be like 1,800 words or something like that, sort of breaking down Amazon's strategy and why this is important. Up to that point, the biggest single shareholder in Anthropic was Google, which had, I think up to that point, put in about $500 million. And one of the things that Amazon, we said, was trying to do is try to make sure that one of the premier LLMs doesn't just get captured by Google, so that you've got OpenAI and Microsoft, Google and Anthropic, and then Palm, and then like, what does Amazon have? So Amazon put this money in. I don't believe, I believe they've only put in about $400 million in cash, maybe $400 to $600 million right now, but they will do up to, or actually there's, I'm saying 400 million to $1 billion is what I've heard they put in so far, and they'll do up to $4 billion. I guess it's over time, but it's probably based on use of AWS computing and that type of thing. So Google might have been getting depositioned, right? No. They don't want to be depositioned out of Anthropic because that's another bet they want to have in the space. So they just said, we're going to do another $2 billion potentially. And the reporting that I have on this is that they put in 500 million recently. So they've done just over $1 billion in cash or direct contribution, and that they'll do, potentially another $1.5 billion. It's not really clear if that's going to be through cloud computing credits or actual cash infusion. I suspect this will true them up to have the same ownership level as AWS or Amazon, because they got in earlier, so they have some of their shares have a much have a much better valuation probably than Amazon. But in any event, it's big money. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the reason you say that about Anthropic is it feels like every month or so they raise more money. So it's not that surprising, but I think that
you don't need customer revenue if VCs and big corporate giants just like float you with cash.
No, and I think your point about what happened with Amazon and now Google, I think it's entirely valid. And I think the part that you wrote about where how OpenAI had garnered so much of the mind share just by being first to market and capturing so much interest, that there's a real rush to look for at least one really strong alternative, and Amazon and Google, of course, want to be behind that. And so the fact that they're both pushing toward Anthropic means that it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy where Anthropic is now more likely to be that OpenAI alternative for those who don't want to use Microsoft.
I think that's the biggest thing right here. I mean, I think I actually listed Amazon as potentially the biggest loser in this investment, because while they were maybe taking a preeminent position, now it's going to be evened up with Google. And Pete Erickson said, are they hedging their investment in case their own LLMs don't succeed? Absolutely. And I think that the bigger issue, or the bigger thing that's going on, is there's this self-fulfilling prophecy now. Everybody wants to know what the primary alternative to OpenAI is, which I believe has north of 85% market share in terms of total activity in the space right now for LLMs specifically. And there's a lot of people like to talk about Meta Llama. They're like, yeah, that's going to be used, but very complex to actually roll that out, actually very costly to implement that. So what's going to be next? And I think just the heat that's being created by Google and Amazon has basically deigned, or anointed, I should say, Anthropic is the primary alternative. And then after that, we'll have Palm and these other types of things until something else comes up. But it looks really good for Anthropic right now. And it's really their race to lose for second place in the market. And we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah.
All right. So let's keep moving. You had another funding announcement, and this was about Abridge. And Abridge, Shiv has been on the Voicebot podcast. We talked to him quite a while ago before he'd raised this much money. He'd raised quite a bit at that point too. But tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah. So one of these stories I feel like I've been writing about pretty much since I started at Voicebot is about how much demand there is for a clinical AI assistant, something that a doctor or a nurse or whoever can use to transcribe and put a conversation that they have with the patient into their notes, and to automatically put it into their electronic health records. I mean, there's been a ton of money going in that direction. It's led to some big raises and big acquisitions, and Abridge is getting ahead on the generative AI part of that. Not the only one, but certainly one of them. And yeah, so raising $30 million for employing generative AI to not only write down, or to turn a spoken conversation or spoken notes into useful data and putting it into the electronic health record, but also to act almost proactively in terms of helping spot potential diagnoses, even that the doctor might not have noticed right away. But it's something that pretty much every clinician wants and needs, and if they can rely on it, then they're going to pay for it. And Abridge can tell investors, give us the money, and we'll have plenty of clients thanks to that early capital.
So I've used this. It started out as a consumer app exclusively. Well, doctors could use it, but like it was mostly for consumers. And you go in, and if you have any complex medical condition, or you're having a conversation, it is hard to keep track of what's going on in the conversation sometimes, particularly since physicians use a language that most of us don't deal with that often. They talk about, specific types of medications, or diseases, or other types of, potential medical issues, which we might not know how to spell. So, for example, to sort of keep the conversation going, these very dense information type conversations, Abridge is actually designed, or it's actually trained on the language of medicine. And so when someone mentions like a medication, like when a physician does, it's transcribing, it will get that correct. And then you can also later, you can tap on it, and it'll take you to more information about that medication, right? Or if it's a particular disease, it was like, oh, geez, we're not sure what this is. It could be one of these three things. It'll get that correct. And then you can go back afterwards and do it. And then, like, how many of us, if you have like a doctor's appointment 6 months apart, let's say you're getting treated for something, how many of you remember what you were told the first time? Being able to go back, and it actually segments out sort of the care plan. It like pulls that out of it, what you're supposed to be doing. So before you go, afterwards, like when you're working on treatment, and then when you go back, you can actually review that. It is super useful. I just love practical AI applications. And this is one of the best. And it just focuses, and it shows you how great domain specific solutions are. Because if this were not trained on medical data, it would be completely useless.
Yeah. And I think about how as these networks expand, I mean, the conversation you had with one doctor that gets turned into notes and put in your record, then later on something happens, you have to go to the hospital or see another doctor, and things that your doctor might not have thought to put in their notes by themselves gets recorded and put in by the AI, and suddenly your second doctor has more information that they might not have had otherwise.
And then you too, if you're seeing a second doctor, like a specialist, you have notes to go back to for in the mobile app. So I really recommend people check out Abridge. Okay, so you had another story on Cleanlab, and I don't know if anybody here has heard about LLMs and hallucinations or confabulations, if you like the more technical term from psychology. But sometimes they, like the internet, they produce information that is untrue. But Cleanlab thinks they have a solution to this.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where the demand is very obvious, but the solution seems very difficult in terms of making data sets better, taking enormous amounts of information and curating them so that they're more useful without cutting out any of the information that actually is still relevant or helpful. So that's where Cleanlab comes in.
There's some data here too that I want, before you finish your thought.
Sure.
They said that Cleanlab saw errors fall by 37%, while accuracy rose from 65 to 78% overall in the DaVinci LLM. That's OpenAI's one of its earlier 3.5 models. A lot of people are working on this. But I just want to ask you a question about it, because this is not an inline truth checker like we've seen from God.AI and from a lot of applications are now doing verification against a vector database. This is really about improving the overall accuracy by improving your data pipeline, the data you train on, the data you access, making sure that it's correct.
Yeah, it's I mean, the classic programming thing of garbage in, garbage out applies to generative AI models just as much as anything else, and anything that can stop that garbage from coming in ahead of time is going to be very helpful, and especially when it comes to some of the more multidimensional and multimodal data. So, for instance, like the image I used for the story was one that I thought was really impressive, that it could look at a picture of a bird and notice that it was mislabeled, and not only say, hey, this is not that bird, but say that it could be this, it's most likely this bird, and suggest a replacement. So instead of just having to get rid of bad data, it can actually replace it with good data.
Absolutely. Okay, let's stay with data. Let's go into Product Garden. So we're going to talk about all the different products that are out here. Nigel's got a great conversation or a great comment here about transparency and policies, but I'm going to come back because we might cover that again at the end. Red Pajama, which is, Together AI has Red Pajama. Red Pajama is a set of data, and it's also a set of open source language models. They actually just released a 30 trillion token data set. Okay, so let's think about this. We think that OpenAI's GPT-4 is trained on 4 trillion tokens, although some people have said it's as high as 13. Most of the others now that we're seeing are like Meta's, I think. Originally, I thought it was 1 trillion, but maybe it's 1.8 trillion for Llama 2. There's some others that are sort of in the low trillions in terms of data. And we have some information here that we talked about in our spectacular Synthetia 4 LLM Innovation Conference. LLM parameters and training data tokens, you can see that the blue is the number of parameters, right? And the training data is the number of tokens used to train. You should see like that's going up, because I think it was Google's the first to really clue into this. We found that having a lot more data to train on, and higher quality, but a lot more data, actually improves the output quality. And it does it at a faster rate at this point than adding more parameters. Plus, when you add more parameters, it's more calculations, inference time is longer, and all those other types of things. But I thought this was really interesting that they brought this out, because this is open source. I got lost there for a second, it looks like. They have a way for you to pull this out and to pull out the data, use subsets of its training. But I think this is like a great resource, and it could be something that accessing the data and cleaning the data is such a huge expense. This could actually lead to a renaissance and an explosion of open source models with higher quality.
Yeah, it's really impressive. It feels like one of those things that the more prominent names are going to either adopt directly or imitate in some way in order to keep up or stay ahead when it comes to their own data sets. Because yeah, what Red Pajama, what Together I put together looks like it's going to be really powerful, and if used correctly, it potentially wiping out some of even the current competition.
Yeah, great. I know I'm having some technical difficulties here. I've been in and out a little bit, but I think that's sorted out right now. So I think that's fascinating. People should check that out. We also have another story from you about OpenAI, ChatGPT. They can now read PDFs and pick tools without being asked. So reading PDFs is something that we've had with Anthropic's Claude for some time. You can upload documents, it will give you information back. So it's long overdue for ChatGPT. And pick tools without being asked is one of the great usability features that everybody's been asking for. Okay, you have plugins or you have different models that you want us to use. Why do we have to go up to the top and do a drop down and know which to pick to get the right answer? It's going to do this on its own. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, no, it's really it's simultaneously simplifying ChatGPT and making it more powerful because on the one hand, you can put in new kinds of documents like PDFs and things that are not necessarily always translated into text or into data. And when you ask ChatGPT to explain something or write something, or make an image, it will do all of that all at once. So you can say, "Oh, explain this," and make a picture of it, and etc. And it will pick out when to use Dolly, when to use its data analysis, and so on by itself without you having to manually switch between those different tools. Although, as I point out, it's interesting that the third-party plugins are not integrated into that system. But I mean, I saw some really just impressive ways that it can be used to not only produce, like for instance, not only produce images, but show two different images and ask for an object in one image to be in the second image, or using its connection to the internet, asking for not only what the weather is in somewhere, but to create an image based on that place and that weather to go along with it. It's just, and like data analytics as well. It's a lot of there's a lot of despair I noticed from certain parts of the internet over whether this means that a lot of startups built around providing these services through OpenAI's APIs are now just done for. So it's telling that OpenAI is not just letting ChatGPT be a background tool, but is still making it the sort of flagship of its operation.
We've heard about this for a long time, the Everything app. We have them in China. We don't have them here. Elon Musk threatened to turn Twitter's now X into that. And maybe the rebranding is part of that. Certainly, Facebook has attempted to do something along these lines with Instagram and its Facebook apps, where it just can do everything. And I think ChatGPT is the one that's probably the closest to getting there. And I think that's really the objective. It's like solve as many problems as we can. This whole thing about the third parties is problematic. And it's actually really complex because this idea of like, if you're searching for travel information, you might have a dozen plugins that could answer that question. Like, how does the system, ChatGPT, know this? And now Samsung Bixby actually had a fairly clever way to address this. It's like pretty straightforward. But I think this coordination function, it's not that you can't do it. Like I was talking to Rohit Prasad, who's like the chief scientist and head of generative AI and former head of Alexa at Amazon. And they've struggled with this for years to figure out like which skills to invoke when and these types of things. It can be done. It's just at some point you're actually playing favorites. And so this idea that like ChatGPT is it's going to be easier for it to do the stuff that it knows it wants to provide itself. And then later on, it's going to figure that out through some sort of personalization that you choose as a user.
Yeah. And also, I mean, speaking of favorites, I mean, Alexa did pick favorites once with its roadside assistance. And we talked about that and how it was kind of a big deal. But in this case, avoiding third parties is probably safer for them. But it's just, the multimodal, the proactive elements. It all comes together to make a really a kind of tool that makes third parties related to it seem unnecessary.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, hey folks, this is Gain, the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every week. Eric and I go through the news, some of the top stories of the week. We do a little bit more analysis and breakdown. Plus, we sometimes add context that wasn't available at the time when we published the stories or others. Please give us a like if you're on LinkedIn or you're on YouTube. Just like hit the like button there. We would definitely appreciate that. And if you're not subscribed, go to our YouTube channel, and maybe Andrew can put a link to that in the comments. Go over there and subscribe, because then you'll be able to watch the recording afterwards. Let's say you joined late and you want to see the great stuff we talked about in terms of deepfakes and the regulation coming out of the White House. Okay. Next up, Poe. Kind of an interesting time for Poe. It seems to be actually developing an interesting business model. I don't know that it'll succeed, but you had a great story about this week.
Yeah, I agree that it's not immediately obvious that Poe will be a commercial financial success, but I really like what they're doing. I personally, as someone who, as part of my job, spends a lot of time playing around with different generative AI models. Having a lot of them in one place is nice. But this new creator economy system is really a cool experiment they're doing, where people can, either using Poe's own system or bringing in and then from elsewhere, have their own sort of fine-tuned, specialized generative AI chatbot, and they can make it available and people can interact with it. And if you're, depending on how many people start using it or how much they use it, Quora, Poe's creator, will actually give some money to you. So it's a little bit like the App Store. It's a little bit like the Alexa Skill Store. It's a little bit like some of the sharing economy systems that have existed, but it's a really good ways, and certainly low cost for them, to encourage people to try Poe in general, and to encourage developers to play around with it and think of it as their hub. And I tried a few of them, and honestly was very impressed with how it did speed up. You can use ChatGPT for a lot of things, but it sometimes takes a little bit to narrow down what you want it to do. And if you find the right bot, it will just immediately do that for you. So that's quite nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's just really clever that someone's trying to build a business model around this, other than subscription, right? Or other than advertising, which are sort of the two that we've seen so far.
Yeah.
This is like, maybe it is a new platform. Maybe the new Everything app will be something created by Poe.
Well, and so many of these services, so many platforms go on and on about being code-free or minimal code, and that you can just make all kinds of software and programs with them. And now Poe is saying, hey, yeah, you do that with a generative AI chatbot and put it on here, and maybe you'll make some money.
Yeah, absolutely. Great idea. Okay, so you had another story here. Let's talk about this. LinkedIn Premium launches generative AI personalization of posts and job listings. It is Microsoft. Microsoft owns LinkedIn. It wasn't going to, we've already seen some generative AI, but I just expect LinkedIn is going to be AI feature central.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, yeah, they've been coming up with they've been putting out new features pretty much every couple months, all year, of ways to have AI help you write your posts, help go put together a resume, help you prepare for job interviews. And now it's sort of extending to just almost a generalized AI assistant that will, if somebody writes a really, really long post that you think might be interesting, but you don't necessarily want to go through the whole thing, you can ask the AI to summarize it. And not only to summarize it, but because you're you're logged in to your own account, it will pick out things that the AI thinks you will be interested in. So whether that's an opportunity for an event, or a request that's hidden within a longer post that you might be interested in, that's really useful. Yep. And then same with looking for jobs, it'll not only say, oh, here's what the company is looking for, but it'll say, oh, you would be a good fit because of this, or here's where you may need some help, and give you personalized information on how you fit for that job and how you fit for the company, and really sort of making it your in an ideal world, your personal assistant for all those professional things that LinkedIn offers.
Your professional career co-pilot, I could see that being a thing, as people, and LinkedIn is the place to do it potentially, because it could actually integrate with not just what you've done in your social graph there, but all the people you're connected to. So it's really interesting. All right,
and especially because as we talk about privacy and things, people aren't necessarily excited about putting in so much information about themselves to an AI, even if it makes it more, even if it personalizes it, make it more useful. But you've already given all that information on LinkedIn, so you're not you're not compromising any new information in that regard.
Agreed. Absolutely. Okay, so we have a series of stories I want to do sort of quick hitters on, and they're kind of related. So we've got Square, a story that we did not get to last week. So they added some generative AI tools for small businesses. We've got Amazon. They rolled out some image generation tools for seller ads. A couple months ago, they had product listing generative AI solutions. Google just rolled out generative AI an image creator for advertisers and businesses. So tell us about those. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's definitely a convergence on looking for how generative AI can help out with the kinds of tasks or the kinds of needs that businesses that, especially just general merchants and small businesses have, helping fill in those gaps so that instead of necessarily having to spend a lot of time and money on putting together an advertising campaign, you ask the AI to take a picture of your product and put it into various appropriate settings so that you can advertise it that way, or you ask the AI to help come up with social media posts and all the other
campaign ideas, everything. I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
It's this idea that generative AI features are like almost instantly became table stakes. I don't know what the adoption is. So the adoption may not be high. And if it's not that high, a lot of these companies will probably be happy because they don't have to pay inference costs. But this idea that it's going to be everywhere and it's just going to be something that's going to be an expected feature, it sounds like.
Yeah, which is why, I will say the one thing I'm skeptical about is that every one of them talks about how using this will boost sales or boost visits by a certain amount. But of course, if they're all using it, then supposedly, that gets negated. It just becomes they don't want to say use this or you'll be behind, but that is essentially what they mean.
Absolutely.
I think,
Absolutely.
I will say though, the Square did take an extra step beyond with their menu generator, actually making an entire menu to including even like suggesting prices, which I thought was
very good, very good idea too. And then like menus are very complicated, and then in particular now in a lot of places you have to list the number of calories and all these things. So very interesting. Okay, so let's talk about AI and the law. LexisNexis, a giant company, not the biggest in terms of information source for lawyers, but obviously very big for lawyers and regulation. So they added, and there's a couple of things I thought were interesting about this. So we've talked in the past about Spellbook, and they have this amazing solution for contracts. This is much more broad. It appears there's several domains that they're focused on. But there's a couple of things I thought were really interesting about this. They said, okay, there's 4 primary use cases across all types of law. Conversational search. So, can you find something? Can you find the thing you need at the time you need it? Document drafting, can it help you create a contract or a legal brief or something? Summarization, lawyers deal with a lot of summary data. And then document upload, which basically allows you to upload documents and then rapidly analyze them. So this is what we've talked about with Anthropic, now with ChatGPT, that you can upload a document, you can just ask questions about the document, and it's much faster than actually having to read the whole thing and parse it out. So I thought this was super interesting. And I'll make one other point. It's built on OpenAI and Anthropic. And Anthropic's probably mostly for the summarization and then the document upload because of the large context window. But again, we started out a while ago talking about this idea that who's going to be the alternative to OpenAI? Who's going to be the sort of the second most popular? Here you go. Anthropic shows up again.
Yeah, it's and LexisNexis is one of those almost not quite as basic as Google or but in terms of widespread use of its tools in the business world is pretty big. So I think who they pick for their generative AI model partners is going to help accelerate the thing you were talking about before about OpenAI and then the alternative to OpenAI.
Yeah, absolutely. One more thing I'll point out here is unstructured data intensive industries. It's a big phrase, but it just means companies, industries that have a lot of natural language data. And I had so many people tell me a year ago, 6 months ago, this is going to come very late to places like healthcare, government, financial services, law, because frankly, like truth is really important there. And like hallucinations just mean you can't use this. And I think they've missed a couple of key points. So first of all, those are industries that have been the most aggressive in adopting it because they have a lot of unstructured data. And large language models are sort of amazing for this. And you have to understand that, first of all, the truthfulness hallucination problem is coming down. A lot of people are attacking that. But also there's a lot of use cases in these industries, and not everyone has to be 100% perfect all the time or has to be perfect in the first thing without someone, having someone do a validation step. So this is just a perfect example to me of if you want to start a new business in generative AI, find an industry or a use case that just has a lot of natural language data. They have problems. You'll be able to unlock them.
Yeah, and also some of those problems people point to, on the legal side, like the value of these kinds of tools for helping put together information or doing research is really high. And the idea that it's the same as just having ChatGPT write your brief and putting it into the record is not the same thing. You should not consider that as a valid use of the technology, but there's a lot more behind the scenes for that.
Got it. Co-pilots for lawyers, co-pilots for doctors. We're talking about all the same thing, generative AI helping folks. Hey, everybody, I just want to let you know, if you joined late, we're actually going to do a special session of GAIN on Monday. OpenAI is having their developer conference on Monday. They're going to live stream the keynote at 1 p.m. Eastern time. We're actually going to gather here with a couple of devs who work directly with OpenAI technologies on a regular basis. A few minutes before then, we're going to talk about the event a little bit and about OpenAI, how far it's come. Then we're going to watch together. We're just going to put the screen up. This will be on LinkedIn. You can watch it there. You can watch it on the YouTube channel, same as you're doing here. And then we're going to have a panel discussion afterwards for about 30 minutes or so. So if you get a chance, join us to do that. We'll put a link here afterwards. We're setting that all up, and we'll have that scheduled. But you're going to get an extra session of GAIN. It's going to be specific on this. So I think that's going to be super fun. All right. I want to talk about one more thing before we get to winners and losers of the week. We're just going to hit on this briefly because this is a very in-depth topic, and I think we might even do a separate session or conference just on these topics. But I think it's a trend that we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about here because it's actually coming to a head. So a couple of weeks ago, Yann LeCuns posted this LinkedIn post, and he's got a great LinkedIn feed. If you don't follow Yann, I think you should. The heretofore silent majority of AI scientists and engineers who, 1, do not believe in AI extension scenarios, or 2, believe we have agency in making AI powerful, reliable, and safe, and 3, think the best way to do so is through open source AI platforms, you need to speak up. And I commented on this, and I've talked to a bunch of people about what we might do along these lines, because the alarmist scenarios are the ones that really get most of the currency. The AI leads to extinction of humanity or other such maladies, because those are great headlines, and a lot of news media like to run those, particularly the non-tech news media, because that's something that people can relate to. Like, oh, we might all die. Wouldn't that be bad? It's a great headline to get clicks. But what's great is Yann has brought this up. It's like, let's have a more measured debate about this, because there's other risks that we can be concerned about. There's also things we don't want to just destroy the industry before it starts. And this is all relevant to using Mission Impossible as your blueprint for creating government regulation. That might not be the best source material to work off of. Not long after this, Andrew Ng started talking more openly about this. Andrew is a well-known person in the AI space. He's been around a long time. Not as well-known as Yoshua Bengio, Jeff Hinton, and Yann LeCuns, but very much. So And we had our friends over at Mozilla actually had been working on this. This is great. They have a joint statement on AI safety and openness. And this isn't to say that we don't need regulation. They're actually not saying that. But I think it's very interesting. It's short. I think people should check it out. I'll put a link in the notes here. But basically saying, hey, AI extinction is a thing, but some of the regulations people are suggesting associated with that are going to actually destroy open source, because they're going to put requirements on control and these types of things. It means no one will be able to put something out or use something that doesn't have those inherently. And that's like what open is. Like, you make it available to everybody. So I thought that was very interesting. And Yann LeCuns also had said, since many AI doom scenarios sound like science fiction, let me ask this: could the Skynet takeover in Terminator have happened if Skynet had been open source? And the answer maybe yes and maybe no. But I think this is like a really important discussion. We've heard Elon Musk, we've heard Eliezer, we've heard Jeff Hinton, we've heard Yashua Bengio, we've heard them all talk with the Stop the Future of Life Institute, Stop Giant AI Now. We've heard about all these things like it's like this big threat. And there's actually a comment by Andrew Ng in an article he posted this week, which says that some of the training or some of the educational materials that are now going to schools have actually heightened students' fear of AI, right? And so it's like, it's just seeping everywhere that like AI is bad. And that might be true in some contexts. It might be true in a very low probability scenarios that nobody's provided evidence of yet. But like, it's really important that now we've got other people starting to come to the table and say, hey, wait a second, we might have a broader discussion about this. Thoughts, Eric?
Yeah, I think a part of what makes me laugh when I see these kinds of things is not that they're not important and relevant. It's that the idea that there can be any sort of concise, definitive conclusion, certainly anything fast happening in terms of what those regulations look like. I think we're still very much at the grand philosophy stage of regulation, combined with some, nitty gritty details of what that regulation looks like. But as we talked about with Biden's executive order, part of the point is to set up these definitions so that people understand not only what the technology is and what it can do, but what they actually should be worried about and what is not a concern. And I think that's where these debates and these open letters come in handy, is because a lot of people don't know how worried they should be or what they should be worrying about. And so I'm hoping that the sort of clear-eyed thought process of Mozilla and so on is going to be the template, as opposed to the AI will kill us all. There's no without any sort of discussion of what that actually means.
Yeah, there is an archive research paper posted last year that interviewed, I don't remember the number, many machine learning scientists, AI scientists, and it found that only about 5% really had any strong belief about extinction scenarios. So there is a silent majority that think that that's very unlikely. It's not to say that it couldn't happen. It's not to say that like it shouldn't be some level of consideration, but it shouldn't be the driving topic. Nigel Wright had some good comments here. Great topic. I agree that polarization and highlighting extremes feels a bit lazy, in my opinion. Doesn't take the upside of the opportunity into consideration. And he also said they're adopting these positions because of the upside for them, which is true. I mean, I think some of the people on the open source side maybe have some upside on open source, but certainly a lot of the folks who are really pushing for regulation, heavy regulation that might be negative towards open source or might constrain innovation, already have a lot of their research and development done, might lock them in as the leaders in the space if no one else can come up after them. So, actually, one other thing I'll say, like on the White House executive order, I don't think we talk about it. It's actually the only AI sort of governance regulatory framework I've seen that actually talks about positive aspects of AI, and that there's actually some things in there in terms of investment in the space and pushing it forward because it identified some societal values alongside these dire issues around molecular biology and robot overlords.
Yeah, it's yeah. I just feel like that's a phase that any technology has to go through, of understanding that by itself it doesn't mean the end of the world. It's just that it has to be regulated in a helpful way rather than either ignored or over-regulated to death.
Absolutely. All right, folks, winners and losers of the week. I'm going to do my winner, and I think the open source community around LLMs is my winner for the week because people are starting to speak up and they're starting to pose the counter arguments to this the strict regulatory frameworks that a lot of the proprietary models are suggesting are going to be most helpful. Who's your winner this week?
I was honestly leaning that way as well, but I think I'll say the average user of generative AI chatbots, especially between what Poes coming up with and what OpenAI has put together, there's just a lot more opportunity to see how many ways to use these kinds of technologies. While that might mean the end of some business ideas, I suspect we're going to see a lot more creative concepts coming out of the opportunity to play around with the technology.
So my loser for the week, and I have a great interview with Atul Deo from AWS. He runs the Amazon Bedrock group in the YouTube channel. So check out our YouTube channel and watch that. If you want to know about Amazon Bedrock, we go deep on that. And then I've got something else coming up with someone else on the team there talking about the Titan model from Synthetia. But Atul and I go broadly around a lot of conversational AI technologies and then the generative AI stuff. So I think you'll like that. But I think Amazon is my loser this week because they're sort of the winner and that they got into Anthropic and that's going to be an option for them going forward. A loser is Google didn't take that and just move on. Google said, hey, at least I'm going to be in there. And that might be okay. Like Amazon and Google against OpenAI and Microsoft might be more of a fair fight, keeping competition alive in the market. But I think for Amazon, hoping to carve out some specific niche, leveraging Anthropic and using it on all their chipsets and all those things might be a little bit more in question than it seemed like a couple of weeks ago. So who do you have for a loser this week?
Honestly, that was really good. But I think for my loser, I'm going to have to say the people who are putting together the regulations in Britain, because as you noticed, we didn't even mention them, and they had what was supposed to be a gigantic event all about setting a global standard for AI regulation.
The vice president was there, I think.
Yes, but the day before that is when Biden put out his rules. Everyone's been anticipating what's coming out of Europe. There was theoretically it was a win for Britain because the U.S. and China and everyone else did agree to sign a shared agreement on how to broadly think about AI ethics. But I think the fact of the matter is that the Prime Minister of Britain was really hoping this would be a way for the country to stand out at this moment. But unsurprisingly, it's the US, it's the EU, and it's China that the companies are actually going to be looking for cues as to how to adjust their business for regulation purposes.
Yeah, so we have three big frameworks, the ones you mentioned, and then maybe we're going to have two little frameworks, which are UK and Singapore. Yeah. But mostly people will just have to focus on one or more of the big three, and that's gonna drive it because those are the biggest markets. Yeah. All right, folks. Hey, special event on Monday for Gain. We'll be back next week. We might actually not make it next week for Gain until Friday. We have to work on logistics. It'll be Thursday or Friday next week. We'll go through all the news once again. Give us a like before you go. We appreciate that. Make a comment. Thanks a lot for being here. We enjoyed everybody's participation today. And until next week, reach out to us. Let us know what's going on. But hey, maybe the generative AI robot overlords be with you when the end is nigh. We hope that you're saying nice things about them now because they are going to review all your emails. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye-bye.